Today, we are taking on one of the most powerful and, let's be honest, controversial organizations on the entire planet, the United Nations. So, how did it even come to be? What does it actually do? And is it still built for the world we live in today? Let's get into it.
80 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the gut-wrenching estimated number of human lives lost in the two world wars that absolutely tore apart the first half of the 20th century. A number so huge, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
And right out of that unbelievable wreckage came this powerful, shared idea: never again. The world's leaders knew that some kind of new global framework for peace wasn't just a nice idea, it was an absolute necessity for our survival.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll kick things off with how the UN was born from the ashes of war. Then we'll look at its core mission. After that, we're going to dissect its power structure, check out some of its biggest wins, and finally, ask a really important question about its future.
Okay, so to really get the UN, you have to go right back to the beginning, to a time when the world was literally still on fire. The journey actually started before the war even ended. Back in 1941, you had U.S. President Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Churchill signing something called the Atlantic Charter. It planted the seed. This idea then led to a bunch of meetings, which all came to a head in San Francisco in 1945. That's where they hammered out the UN Charter, its founding constitution. And then, finally, on October 24, 1945, the United Nations was officially born. So, the UN is now officially a thing. But what was its actual job supposed to be? Well, for that, you've got to look at the UN Charter. It's the blueprint. The Charter lays out 4 huge goals. First, and this is the big one, keep the peace and security. Second, help countries get along, based on equality. Third, work together to solve the world's massive problems, economic, social, you name it. And fourth, promote respect for human rights for everybody. Pretty much everything the UN does is built on these 4 pillars.
And at its heart, the Charter's main idea is simple but, wow, revolutionary. It makes every member country promise to try and find peaceful solutions first. The whole point is to swap the battlefield for the negotiating table. That right there is the fundamental promise of the United Nations.
Okay, so you have these really ambitious goals, but how is this massive organization actually put together to make them happen? Let's pop the hood and take a look at the UN's core machinery.
So, the UN is built around 6 main parts, or organs, and they each have a special job. You've got everything from the World Court in The Hague to the administrative arm, the Secretariat in New York. They're all important, but for our purposes, we're going to focus on the 2 you hear about all the time, the General Assembly and the big one, the Security Council. Okay, think of it this way. The General Assembly is kind of like the world's town hall. All 193 member countries are in there, each gets 1 vote. It's a place for big debates and making recommendations. The Security Council, though, that's the world's emergency response team. It is way smaller, only 15 members, but its decisions can be legally binding. This is where the UN's real teeth are.
And inside that powerful council, there's this one single mechanism that changes everything: the veto. The 5 permanent members, the P5, can each by themselves block any major resolution. A single no vote from just one of them, and the whole thing comes to a screeching halt. This power has been used hundreds of times, and it's often the very thing that paralyzes the Council on huge global issues. You really can't understand the UN without understanding the veto. So with this really complex structure in place, what has the UN actually gotten done? Let's move from the theory to the real world and look at some of its biggest impacts.
One of the UN's first historic achievements was its role in decolonization. From the very beginning, the organization pushed for the right of people to rule themselves, to not live under foreign colonial rule.
And that push had a massive, massive effect. After the UN's big 1960 Declaration on Decolonization, the organization helped build international pressure that led to around 60 territories gaining their freedom and becoming independent countries.
Another incredible success story was the fight against apartheid in South Africa. For decades, the UN kept up the pressure, diplomatically and then with sanctions like banning arms sales, all to isolate the racist minority government. This global campaign was a huge reason the regime finally had to end its awful policies. And it all led to that incredible moment in 1994 when Nelson Mandela, a political prisoner for 27 years, was elected president in the country's first truly free elections. Just amazing. And beyond these huge political wins, The UN has just fundamentally changed how we all think about human rights. It took on the gigantic task of creating a common standard for all people in all nations.
The absolute cornerstone of all of this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, it's not a law that can be enforced, but this game-changing 1948 document is the moral and political foundation for rights all over the world. It's the inspiration behind countless laws and treaties that protect the basic dignity of people everywhere.
So all that brings us to the present day and to a really critical debate about reform. The world has changed so much since 1945, and a lot of people are asking if the UN's most powerful part has actually kept up.
And that's really the core question, isn't it? The permanent members of the Security Council, the winners of World War II, were decided by the political reality of that moment. But does that setup still make any sense for the world we live in now?
The arguments for shaking things up are pretty strong. The UN has grown from just 51 members to 193, but the power structure is basically frozen in time. Entire continents like Africa and Latin America have no permanent voice, while huge global powers like India, Germany, Japan, and Brazil are arguing that the Council has to change to reflect 21st century reality if it wants to stay legitimate.
And that brings us to our final thought here. Look, the UN has its flaws. It faces enormous challenges. But for all the arguments, it's still the only global stage we've got. It's the one place for dialogue, for cooperation, and for trying to tackle humanity's biggest problems together. So we'll just leave you with this question. For all its imperfections, what would our world actually look like without it?